Hello and welcome to another NYSAC news update. My name is Ryan Gregoire. I am your association's legislative director, and today I'm joined by Pat Cummings, NYSAC Counsel. Pat, thanks for joining us.
Anytime.
Today we're going to be covering the last few days of the 2023 state legislative session and some of the significant pieces of legislation that have passed through both houses and have either already made their way to the governor's desk or soon will be making their way to the governor's desk for her consideration. I guess right off the top here, I just want to say this has been a very strange legislative session. There was a delayed budget, which truncated the amount of time state lawmakers had to work on policy towards the end of the year, which really forced a large volume of bills to pass through both houses without the same level of scrutiny, I guess, as in the past. So that made it very difficult for staff, for members, and then for all of us trying to influence the legislation to work collaboratively on some larger policy areas, which is why I think you've probably read news stories that said there wasn't some big ugly or some giant policy proposal because there just wasn't enough time. Simply, there wasn't enough time to work on more complex issues.
Typically, it's April 1st, budget gets done, and then late June, the legislature gets out of town. This year, it was, only a few weeks between the end of when by the time the budget was done and it was the beginning of June that the legislature left. So only leaving a few weeks to negotiate a lot of important bills that did get introduced and passed that we'll talk about.
Now, that being said, the lawmakers in Albany passed 896 bills through both houses. That's on par for a normal, typical legislative session. Interestingly enough, it's more bills than most other states combined in our country. So New York does produce and pass quite a number of bills. There's over 15,000 bills that have been introduced this session already, and remember, session is a 2-year time frame, so we're only in that first year of bill introductions. But, one of the largest bills, not largest, but one of the most significant pieces of legislation that we focused on this year was dealing with REM tax foreclosures. This was a hot topic during budget negotiations. We opposed the governor's proposal that was included in her budget for a variety of reasons, one of which being we wanted to wait and see what the Supreme Court was going to do in the Tyler Hennepin decision. They came out with that decision days before the end of session, and the legislature was really interested in moving policy in this space to try and not only deal with what the Supreme Court decided, but look at more comprehensive Article 11 tax law reform. And at the end of the day, Pat, the legislature did end up passing just one bill, and that was a temporary moratorium on tax foreclosure proceedings.
That's correct.
So can you tell us a little bit about what that moratorium is?
Sure.
And then maybe we can talk about some of the other bills that were considered, but we successfully stopped.
Yeah, well, let's even back up a little bit because it's such a complex system, and I think that's why they did a moratorium. It is such a complex system, what we're talking about. We're talking about foreclosing on property when individuals can't or don't pay for multiple years their property taxes. The potential for a municipality, in the state of New York's case, the law has a municipality has the duty to try to work with that individual, and when they can't pay, to foreclose on that property, take the title in some cases, again, it's complex, in most cases, take the title and then auction that property off to make sure it gets back on the tax rolls after, again, a number of years of an individual not paying. Mostly in New York, this is a county responsibility. There are places like Westchester County where it's a town responsibility put in their charter. There's a lot of cities that operate this as well. And then there's moving pieces like land banks where they'll try to get brownfields or other kind of properties, and the municipality hands that property over to the land banks and they rehab it and get it back on the roll. So there's a lot of different systems out there. What we did know from the Supreme Court case is that in New York we're a little bit unique, us and a few other states. where we get to, as a municipality, if in the rare case that, let's say, $10,000 of taxes are owed, but then the property is auctioned for $15,000, we're able to keep that overage. We're able to keep the excess funding. And the rationale behind that, I know that sounds like an eyebrow raiser, right? And it certainly was for the court. They decided they can't do it. Was in New York's case, again, for counties, we don't make money on these properties in the overall grand scheme, because we need to make schools whole immediately. We need to make towns whole immediately. And we lose a lot of money on the properties that we're foreclosing on. Because some are worth actually less than any value due to, again, damage to the property or something. And the excess kind of kept us afloat. We are no longer able to keep that excess. We know that for a fact. That is law now, right? So then what was the state looking to do?
That's what was decided in Tyler Hampton.
That was decided in that was the Supreme Court case. So now the state's looking at this and saying, we need a whole new system.
Yeah.
Now that we can't have that. And now we've got multiple bills coming in all at once with the last few days of session on, well, how are we going to resolve this? And again, considering every different place around the state did it differently. What are we going to do? Ultimately, the decision came down to, let's hold on all these different bills in this decision. We're going to put a pause on municipalities. Again, this was just passed in both houses. It hasn't been signed into law yet. The solution was, let's put a pause on this to figure out what to do with this overage. Is it going to go to some kind of escrow, and then how that's going to be delivered back, and when is that going to be delivered back to the original property owner? We'll figure this all out at later legislation, but for now, we're going to put a pause on allowing a municipality to foreclose and take title from these lands. For at least, I think it's up to, what is it, June of next year?
The end of June of next year, yeah.
And there was a window by which, when this bill was passed, that you can still, a county, city, town could take title. And I believe it was up to July,
to July 1st.
Up to July 1st, where if the municipalities took that title, by then they can still auction it off, even within this moratorium time period. But if it didn't occur before that, we got to put a pause on everything until next legislative session, when they're looking to come up with fixing this complex system, or coming with a more uniform system. I don't know if fixing is the right word. More uniform system. But until then, this moratorium puts a pause on all of that if and when signed into law.
Right. So for our members, the key to think about here on the in rem issue, there were a lot of potentially dramatic reforms to the process that were being considered by the state legislature. None of those bills passed through both houses. In fact, none of them moved through either chamber. Rather, they decided to go with this in rem moratorium. But again, as Pat mentioned, it's not law right now. The governor still has to sign it. So the next question is, well, when is she going to sign it? We don't know. In New York State, the governor can call a bill, or the legislature has the authority to send her a bill. Mm-hmm. So that can happen still. When exactly that process is going to occur, we don't know.
We know it'll be by December 31st. That's by they have to send it before year end, or else it's an automatic veto on that end. So they're going to send it anytime between now and December 31st.
December 31st, right. So, but the next step of this process is, and I think you've heard this from Pat now, we at NYSAC and other stakeholders in the game, like the Land Banks Association, for example, we will be working on policy that we can give to the legislature to ease some of the concerns that we've identified in these other bills. And we don't need to get into that right now, but you should know that we're going to be working to try and get a long-term solution in place. And then once that bill is passed and enacted into law, the moratorium would go away. We would have a repeal provision. Not to get too technical, but we would essentially repeal the moratorium and this new law would take effect. So what I want to do now is actually talk about some good policy and also some other pieces of legislation that have passed through both houses that do have some troubling elements, and we're going to be looking for either some modifications or a veto message from the governor. But let's start with highlighting some legislation that has a positive impact for county governments. One of which that I want to share with everyone now is there was a bill, and this was sponsored by Assemblymember McDonald, Senator Cooney, that would allow assessed property under a pilot agreement to be factored into the calculation for determining tax levy growth. Now, why is that important? It allows pilot projects to be included in your allowable growth factor, giving you a little additional wiggle room on how much you can increase your property tax levy if you need to. Again, it's just a tool to make it a little bit easier if you're facing some financial burdens in your county. So that's a good piece of legislation. We'll be looking for the governor to sign that bill. There was another bill that would allow counties and other municipalities the ability to go out and bond for acquisition and infrastructure improvements for broadband projects. That's going to be helpful when the Connect All program starts rolling out federal dollars and state dollars for additional broadband expansion. So another piece of good legislation. There was a bill, Pat, that expanded the workers' compensation pool.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? And we've been fighting this for 25 years now.
Yeah.
Why is this helpful?
It's, we're employers. We're large employers, counties, and as employers, you're going to have to provide workers' comp, whether you're doing that as a self-insured pool or you're joining a group of some kind. This bill really allows more municipalities and counties that have current worker comp pools to join what's called public group self-insured programs, and then also has some advantages with allowing for deductible options. Ultimately, it's
designed to reduce worker comp costs, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can make your pools bigger, reduce risk, theoretically, hopefully lower costs because of that with these deductions. So there's potential savings and potential more options for counties to procure and join workers' comp pools for which. More competition should drive down prices. Going to these pools potentially larger pools should be able to lower your workers' comp prices. It gives you more flexibility.
Great. So that's another option that hopefully will save some counties some funding. There's been a couple of bills that have actually already been signed into law, priority bills of NYSACs. A few years ago now, we were successful in getting a piece of legislation enacted that would expand investment options for counties to be inclusive of what New York City already has the ability to do. And this has generated significant additional financial benefits for counties that you would have otherwise had to go out and obtain through your taxpayers. But this additional revenue has allowed you to make some of those offsets. So that bill has been extended. They did another 2-year extension on that authority, which is a good piece of news both for New York City and for the other 57 counties. There was another program that extends the open auction bond sale pilot program. So right now, since 2019, municipalities and counties have been able to conduct open auction public bond sales. And the reason why that's important is it allows you to reach a larger pool of potential buyers for your bonds. So you should, in theory, be able to get better rates, and that, again, lowers costs for developing infrastructure. And then, Pat, there was another bill that dealt with the reappointment and appointment of notaries that has been signed into law. Can you tell us what that does?
Sure. For attorneys out there that are notaries, for anyone that is a notary, but also especially through your county clerk's offices, there's been some changes in that world. E-notary. So we can, to get new notaries, there was a law last year that this is going to go through the Department of State. This new bill that was just passed made clear and arguably changed. I think actually did just it changed the process for renewals. They're no longer going to go through the county clerk's office. For existing notaries, the renewals are going to go through the Department of State as well. The clerks worked closely with DOS and the state on this. The fees will still come to the local areas, the local government and the counties as we typically got. And then more, just as importantly, the clerks will still be getting all this information in real time because they need to know that these Notaries are currently active and accurate when for a number of reasons with documents and document authorization that come into their offices. They're working with the Department of State on making sure when those e-notaries are going in, the clerks are getting those in real time, and they're doing software upgrades and working with them directly to make sure that's happening, that handoff is happening on the local end.
So it's another efficiency measure, really.
It's an efficiency measure, but it was one of those things that we wanted to make sure we were doing it right, because we want to make sure that information was getting to the locals who really need that in the ground in real time. So it was definitely an efficient measure for the consumer to go get this done online, but then we also want to make sure the information was getting out quickly and accurately to the locals that need it to then provide further services for the residents. And it was a process, but it's worked out. It worked out.
And thank you, Pat, for negotiating that bill, because I know you put a lot of work in with the governor's office.
Yeah,
the
Clerks Association did. They did a great job, and they worked well with the OS. I mean, there was they're having weekly meetings now to make sure that this process goes smoothly. So it was a good collaboration.
A couple other bills that we partnered with NYSAC, the County Health Officials Association, on this year that actually passed through both houses. One of which would allow the Commissioner of the Department of Health to reform the Article 28 regulations and Article 36 regulations to no longer require county health departments to go through that very arduous bureaucratic process of maintaining their licensing within both of those Article 28, Article 36 of the Public Health Law. This is going to ease up your burden from your health departments. If you talk to your directors and your commissioners, they are ecstatic about this bill. We're hoping the governor will sign this, and Senator Rivera, who is the chair of the Health Committee, and Assemblymember Paulin, who's the chair of the Health Committee in the Assembly, have been instrumental partners with us on this. So we thank them for their assistance as well. A couple of bills that I wanted to highlight that we were able to successfully stop, and I want to talk about some legislation that is problematic that we're going to be looking for the governor to veto. But there was some legislation that was moving through the process pretty rapidly that would have prohibited counties from voluntarily going out there and requiring individuals who are on probation to essentially pay a fee for the process of monitoring and screening and testing them when they're placed on probation. It's called the End Predatory Fees Act. That bill did not advance this year, in part because that revenue is used to pay for the probation departments. Right now, state aid for probation departments is less than 9%. So that's an example of a bill that we were able to stop from passing. It would have had a negative financial impact to counties. We stopped that from passing. There was another bill that would have mandated significant changes to IDAs, and I want to thank Onondaga County for bringing this to our attention. Again, that bill did not advance. It would have had a significant impact on Micron and some of the economic development work that's happening in Onondaga County, as well as other communities across the state. That bill did not advance. So that's another piece of good news. But, when you have a session that includes almost 900 bills, some of them are not going to be favorable to counties, despite our best efforts. And that's why I bring this to everyone's attention because, right now in the legislative cycle, even though the Senate and Assembly are not in session, most of these bills still have yet to be delivered to the governor. And the governor has a couple of different options. She can either sign bills when they're presented to her, she can outright veto bills, and she can negotiate what's called a chapter amendment. Most bills get signed as written. Some, a very small amount, will get vetoed. And then the other chunk of bills, maybe a third or less probably, maybe 100 bills or so, will get negotiated through chapter amendments. And basically what that means is the governor agrees to sign the bill as long as the legislature passes and then delivers a subsequent piece of legislation called a chapter amendment to amend that law that she just signed into law. And that happens in the next scheduled session. So that's what we mean when we talk about a chapter amendment, but I just wanted to make sure everyone understood what that is.
It's important in this context because if you hear any of these bills that we talked about before that you like or don't like, and they've just passed both houses, they haven't been signed yet, this is another swing at that pitch. I mean, we have the ability to, and this is at NYSAC we'll be advocating to make changes on some of these bills that are helpful to counties, but definitely on your end, your voice is always needed. So it's definitely, and I know we hadn't mentioned a lot of the bill numbers now. We have on our website our Pass Both Houses
We do.
document. So you can find this in every bill. I don't know, Ryan, I did a great job putting that together. Every bill I know he was in 900 bills, but every bill, we've isolated out every one that has impact directly to counties. So what is it down
It's
to?
in our report.
80, 100, something like that. I don't know the number, but dozens and dozens. It's in our report with the numbers, so you can find these and every bill to find the bill number and who's the sponsor.
Yeah, so on some of these more problematic pieces of legislation, one of them was a bill that ended up passing both houses. We were successful in stopping it last session, but we knew that this was going to come up again in this session, and that is dealing with the timing of local elections, county elections and town elections for non-constitutional officers. So what does that mean? County executives, county legislators, county supervisors, town council members. Your county clerks, your DAs, your sheriffs, your judges, those are exempt from this bill that we're talking about. And what it does is, beginning in 2025, for races that are either, if you're running in 2025 or if you're running in a future year in an odd year, your term will be adjusted so then you will be running on an even year. So let me give you an example because I know that's confusing. If you're running in November of 2025, say for a 4-year term, that would run from January 1st, 26 through December 31st, 2029, and you would normally run on November of 2029, your term is going to be shortened by a year. So you're going to have a 3-year term, so you're going to be running in 2028. So if you're running in 2025 for a 4-year term, it's really only going to be a 3-year term. If you're running for a 2-year term, it's really only going to be a 1-year term. And then once you're on an even cycle, you go back to your full term. We have an issue with this legislation primarily because it disrupts local home rule authority. Right now, if a county wants to move their elections, if they want to change their terms, you can do that through local option. You can do this locally. This bill will supersede that authority, and if the governor signs it, and again, that's if the governor signs this into law, then all of those officials will be moved into an even year election cycle. But again, it does not touch the constitutional officers. So your DAs, clerks, sheriffs, those are not touched.
That's correct. Yeah, I also want to add to it. This is if you're a town supervisor listening to this. This is at a town level too. So on municipal levels, this does not impact cities and villages.
Right.
That's also because of constitutional reasons. If to make those elections to be on even years, it would take a constitutional change and a referendum of the people to adopt that. This impacts directly county and town officials unless they are that subgroup that Ryan just described that are considered constitutional officers. But any county legislator, any town supervisor, this bill, if signed into law, will apply to your future election after 2025.
Yes. So that's a bill that we're going to be looking for the governor to veto. One of the last pieces of legislation that is problematic, and the governor vetoed this last year, is relating to the wrongful death statute.
Yep.
So what is wrongful death? Can you just give our members a sense of what this is and why we're looking for a veto?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, it's got a couple names. It's known also as the Grieving Family Act or the Wrongful Death Act. It's talking about wrongful death lawsuits and how they're handled in the state of New York. So, an action occurs, results in passing of an individual, and there's an action based on that. In New York, to recover on those damages, currently we only look at economic loss, really how old the individual is, how much income potential they would have had for that surviving family. This bill looks to expand a couple places. One, it expands the statute of limitations, first off. So you only, in New York, you have 2 years if you're a surviving family member to bring an action like this. This bill would expand it to, believe 3.5 years. Then two, it would also expand how much an individual could recover. They do that by putting in emotional loss and love loss, emotional support of that family member, which as well as economic loss. So really, the amount that the surviving family member would get could potentially be considerably more than they currently are entitled to in New York. They also expand in this bill what a family member is considered. Under the current law, it is only a surviving child, parent, or spouse can bring this suit. This new law just has close family members is what they call it, and there's a list of what that potentially can be, but it could be pretty far ranging. Now, why is NYSAC concerned with this bill? It would really increase we get the policy and we understand for the reason for the change. That said, this will definitely lead to, and this is why the governor vetoed it last year, an increase in liability insurance. Medical malpractice is really a big area you see these kind of suits going on. So medical bills, hospital bills, nursing home bills, and counties have these kind of suits as well. We're talking about a large increase in the costs on county government, on the healthcare system, and we definitely, although we get the policy, we need some kind of support on the fiscal end on this because it would be
It's going
relatively
to drive
significant.
insurance premiums.
It will drive insurance and premiums. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
correct. And for
Okay.
those counties that are self-insured,
Yeah.
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 especially the ones with hospitals or yeah.
Sure. So, Pat, I know we covered a lot of bills here again for our members. And again, we have a full report on our website, nysac.org. It's right on the homepage. It explains, the bills that pass through both houses. It's the end of session recap report, and it'll walk you through all of this. You can read the bills in depth if you're interested. Is there anything else that you wanted to highlight for members, Pat, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think a bill that didn't make as much noise this year, but it passed, is as it did last year, and it didn't pass, is the Clean Slate Act, and
Yeah.
that definitely will impact county and county operations. What it is, in a nutshell, it's a super sealing of criminal records. And your county clerk holds a lot of these records, felonies on the most part. Your towns, if you're a town supervisor, your town clerk holds a lot of the misdemeanor records. And this is the policy behind it is really to make sure that one that's been arrested, that these records get kept more confidential and that they're not used against an individual for future employment. There's a lot of nuance to this bill. There are areas now where certain employers, like in education and certain healthcare industries, they can still have access to these records. But this passed. It will change the way what we can and can't send out through your county clerk's office. OCA is in charge of a lot of this and how the system's going to work. The effective date's not for a year to even begin this, and most of the provisions that impact counties are 2 to 3 years down the line. So that there will be costs to this, but to put this program in place, we do have some years to work on. Well, exactly what are the costs going to be, and asking for this in future budget years. So this is one that's passed, but I think in future budgets we're going to have to take a closer look at
Need some funding.
We're going to need some funding to make this policy happen. We did get some wins here too, though. There used to be punitive damages potentially on if any of these records got out on your county clerk. That has been taken out. So it's
We got some amendments that will
Yeah.
make it a little easier.
Yeah.
Sure. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in. This is a NYSAC News video update. My name is Ryan Gregoire, NYSAC's Legislative Director, and I'm joined today by Pat Cummings, NYSAC Counsel. Again, thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.